Good afternoon and welcome to this new session of our doctoral seminar series. My name is Dominique Somda. I'm a research fellow at UMA, the Institute for Humanities in Africa at the University of Cape Town. The seminar is streaming on Facebook just now, and you will find a recording of the session on the UMA YouTube channel a little later today or tomorrow. To ensure the safety of the session, we are asking the participants to please include their full names when they register. If you haven't done so, please rename yourself. You might find yourself temporarily placed in the waiting room otherwise. In the doctoral seminar series, we invite our guests to reflect on the challenges and strategies of the doctoral work of their research journey, with a particular focus on the turning points and critical experiences that shape their journey. Our speaker today is our colleague, Dr. Leah Junck. Our title is Tindering into a methodological cul-de-sac, my voyage of exploring interconnapptions. Leah Junck is currently a postdoctoral fellow at UMA. She's a social anthropologist with a PhD from the University of Cape Town, for which she conducted research on the dating application Tinder. Currently, she's holding this position, working on AI and the ethics of care. Leah has previously worked as a journalist and at the Health Economics and IHV Eds, a research division at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. There, she conducted policy-oriented health research. Interests include the social impacts of digital technologies, the ethics of artificial intelligence, identity and migration, as well as gender and minority rights. Furthermore, Leah is actively involved in the International Union of the Anthropological and Ethnological Sciences, the Network for Digital Humanities in Africa, and she also writes for the South African Young Academy of Sciences. Leah, welcome. We are looking forward to your talk. Now, I'm going to share my screen so we could watch your PowerPoint. So just give me a second.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I think, okay, here it is. Can you see it? Okay, that's great. I'm going to have it full screen. Okay.
Okay.
That's fine.
Yes, I think that's fine. Thank you so much, Jam, for the introduction. And yeah, as per title, I'll be walking you through some aspects of my voyage of exploring interconnections via Tinder, focusing especially on the feeling of having Tindered myself as a researcher into a cul-de-sac. Next slide. Right, so just to give you a very brief overview, my PhD research was grappling with the question of how Tinder is used in Cape Town to establish intimacy. I followed the dating experiences of 25 study participants for 2 years through regular semi-structured interviews, collecting life histories and doing participant observation. You know, the go-to methodology of anthropologists trying to gain an insight into people's everyday routine. And I used Tinder itself as a recruitment tool, so that's what I will be discussing today. So what is Tinder? I always have to caution myself to not assume everyone knows what Tinder is. It's a GPS coordinated dating app and was launched in 2012. And it has been the most notable dating app in terms of reach and user base. Potential matches are shown based on geographic proximity and among some other factors, so namely age and binary gender categories, male and female. And it works through an interface that allows users to either swipe right to like, or left to pass on the touch screen of a smartphone, tablet, or similar device. So swiping left results in the profile on the screen disappearing. And if two users have swiped right for each other, this leads to a match, such as in the image that was shown before, and enables them to chat through the app. That was a stock image, by the way, that is commonly used. So yeah, and right, exactly. Then that's what happens when both people like each other, swipe right for each other. Right, and then the next one was the sample that I ended up with. But what I want to focus on really is the how and what the process of connecting with the study participants meant for how I came to understand relating via Tinder. Right, so setting up a research profile to recruit participants via Tinder and immersing myself in this world, I had no concrete idea of what my sample would look like. Next slide, please. So the mini biography on Tinder that I wrote read as follows. Hi there, I'm doing my PhD on Tinder experiences and I'm looking for people who are happy to share their stories with me. Coffee is on me, smiley face. Looking forward to chatting with you. And the text was accompanied by 2 pictures of myself. Next slide. This one was taken about a year prior by someone I had met on Tinder privately, on my private research, private Tinder profile, and someone I'd gone on a few dates with. And I picked it because I felt it represented me well at the time, and also I didn't have a whole lot of pictures of myself available. And a friend of mine added a UCT logo and the words online dating research to it. And I decided to include an additional picture of me on UCT campus in my graduation gown. That's the next slide. Remembering that I heard people responding negatively if Tinder users only have one image of themselves, and also wanting to affirm my connection to the university. So enthusiastically, I started swiping right and only right as soon as I was set up. I liked the idea of participants choosing me as well, instead of just the other way around, me choosing them, selecting them, and thus allowing for a more democratic approach to ethnographic research. And that participation is not just voluntary, but encouraged from the side of participants. While the research was actively orchestrated by me, there wouldn't be any participation happening unless an individual makes the decision to swipe right on a profile that, you know, explicitly says it declares doing research on Tinder. And after matching, I would invite my match to meet for an interview in a public place of their convenience. And I met with 25 participants I ended up recruiting on a regular basis, at least with most of them, in either cafes or restaurants for walk or in their homes. But back to the initial recruitment stage, I was not prepared for the feedback I received, putting me in a position of having to establish selection criteria after all. So much for a democratic approach. I was imagining that I would have to do a lot more to convince people about the authenticity of my profile and the validity of my research intentions. And people did ask a lot of questions about the research itself. But most of those who I matched and got into conversation with didn't seem to question whether I wasn't up to something quite different, which was surprising to me, given that there are stories of scams surfacing every now and then, and they tend to be widely circulated online, such as this one in the next slide. So that was a recent one, I think last week, My former supervisor shared it with me. And yeah, about a scam in Cape Town where Tinder was used. And ironically, there's an advertisement at the bottom there on that webpage where they were reporting about it, advertising for another dating website or app. And can we just continue with the next slide also? Right, so I was unsure how to select from this pool of options that now seemed available to me. As there are more men on Tinder looking for women than there are women looking for women, and also women looking for men. My approach of swiping right for everyone initially left me with a predominantly male sample. And I was worried about that, also because I kept being asked by people and colleagues whether I don't believe men specifically will just swipe on my profile for reasons other than wanting to participate in my research. And notwithstanding my broad app settings, so set to male, oh, that's just thunder. Yes. So yeah, so I had very broad app settings, set to male and female. That's a thunder. Maximum age span and up to 20 kilometers away. I winded up with a selection that largely consisted of middle-class South Africans, and the majority would be classified as white in the context, both English and Afrikaans first language speakers. And so I started skipping men while I was figuring out my selection criteria dilemma, that is swiping left for them in search for more female participants in line with the binary categories available on Tinder, and try to diversify my sample also in terms of age and to cover different regions. And I felt compelled to diversify my sample despite ethnographers such as myself usually being less concerned with statistical sample bias and more with telling a story. As I might have been in a more traditional participant observation setup, immersing myself, you know, in a particular place and in socialities for a longer period of time, rather than as I felt dependent on interview setups that I navigated online. And yeah, although my ethnography was never meant to be a representative study, but one based on individual experiences, and despite my recruitment method also implying that the cohort of the study cannot be exactly pinpointed and localized, I could not help but being concerned about ending up with a niche sample. And in order to feel as though I had more control over my sample, or at least an idea of what it could look like, I even decided to purchase Tinder Gold at the price of 121 rand 25 cents per month, while the standard version of Tinder is free, except for the internet costs. Yeah, so one feature only paying Tinder customers can enjoy is being able to see who one has already been liked by. So it thus becomes possible to select more time efficiently, skipping over the playful process of making speedy decisions with one's thumb, and instead going straight into your list of confirmed options if one chooses to. So this alternative selection process, however, takes away this possibly igniting it's a match moment that we saw, and that Tinder advertisements play on, but when you see who liked you back. And Tinder Gold also makes it possible to swipe anywhere in the world, thereby eliminating the app's location-based restrictions. And one can also hide information that is automatically transferred from Facebook, which is a requirement. You must have a Facebook profile to be on Tinder. But yeah, if you purchase Tinder Gold, you can hide those information such as age or distance. You can boost yourself to the top of the Tinder list every so often, swipe unlimitedly, and use additional super likes, which indicates special interest in a person with a blue star. Yes, so this hybrid sea of options that seemed just available to me now made it difficult for me to navigate my desire to connect and have an open exchange of thoughts. I think Tinder doesn't only create an illusion of an unlimited number of possible connections, given the right settings, appearances, and investments, but matches also carry the promise of a certain kind of experience, namely one that is inherently intimate. And the idea of being ethnographically intimate with a variety of people and being able to create these experiences made me feel excited and numb and powerful and paralyzed all at the same time. Each of my Tinder swipes and matches would require an investment and commitment on my behalf, as well as trust that at least some of the matches would be interested enough to in participating to not impulsively shift from, a right swipe attitude to a not instantly gratified thank you next sentiment. So using Tinder as a recruitment tool, especially so upon becoming a paying member, I felt the loss of distance between me as a researcher and my research objectives. I went native, so to say, not necessarily in the sense of becoming close and sympathetic to the individuals I intended to connect with and whose experiences I desired knowing about, but rather I temporarily felt myself growing to accept kind of an emotional distance that made me collect data and informants almost like a zombie, always looking for an even better and more complete sample, instead of valuing the interest and the connections already established. Next slide, please. Right. So a couple of months into my fieldwork, I tried to open the app and found that I had been denied access. I consulted, with the Tinder website and realized that there was no hotline or live chat feature, and the only channel to contact Tinder is a custom email address, through which I ended up exchanging 14 emails with Tinder support staff and asking for clarity as to why I was banned. I was responded to with a generic email. That's the next slide. Yes, and after pressing for an answer and stressing that I had checked the terms of service and could not find myself to be at fault for violating any of them, I received the very same email content again. And then further emails from my side then prompted a response stating that Tinder cannot provide any details at this time, and they emphasized that I would not be able to create a new profile. I eventually asked for all my Tinder data to be sent to me, and was then informed that my data had already been deleted from Tinder. And when I Googled the error code that popped up on my screen when I tried to log in, related to Tinder bans, I found that this was a much discussed topic on sites such as the discussion website Reddit. And on these sites, blocked Tinder users were seeking to find out why they were banned or share their frustrations around it. And while social media platforms are generally not generous with this kind of data, Tinder is notoriously secretive about its protocols, and behind the scene processes. So yeah, people are left to speculate whether other users have reported them or whether their profile has been picked up by a bot online. So at the end, I did not necessarily need more research participants at this stage of my fieldwork. I'd met with about 15 people already, but I was dreading not having access to the data I had collected online. That is, my initial conversations before moving them onto the chat platform WhatsApp, which is how it usually goes from Tinder to WhatsApp. And the profiles of participants, although the details of that I could still obtain during the interviews, and the list of potential participants that I never ended up chatting with. So the ban meant a loss to the digital component of my research. Even though the fieldwork, most of the fieldwork took place offline, and I used the platform just for recruitment purposes, and had very brief conversations on there, and also for learning how the app works. It wasn't a very abrupt and complete repositioning of my gaze to be offline exclusively. So I would still have liked some fresh blood in terms of interviews on occasion, I felt then, and perhaps providing me with an alternative angle on my research topic. I explained it, that's how I explained it then, to a friend I had made on Tinder, using my private profile. So that was months earlier. And he put me in touch with a friend of his, and which led to further meetings. So being blocked on Tinder led me to flirt with a more traditional snowballing recruitment method, which also happened to bring me in touch with more female participants. And yeah, having lost access to my digital data, I became even more meticulous with taking and neatly archiving detailed field notes as well. I believe that, the access to vast data that computer technologies provide, or at least the sense that there's all this data, may also facilitate a deceptive sense of control, which researchers should stay aware of when making use of these technologies. Next slide, please. Yes, but more to the point I'm trying to make, the emails emphasized an ethical quandary, really. What is data to the people I came across on Tinder? What was data to me? And I did not always pay too much attention to each profile online, given the large number of them. But people who came across my research profile might have assumed otherwise. And given the lack of information available to me about my being banned, I could only hypothesize about this. So what the experience did, however, was that I reconsidered my own presence on Tinder and my relationship both with participants and non-participants with whom I had happened to cross paths online. Being banned made me wonder whether my research intentions declared in my Tinder research profile interrupted a consensus around the search for romantic or sexual intimacy, in my own hope of transforming matches into a different kind of intimate relationship between researcher and participant, for those interested in sharing their stories with me. So I wondered whether my exclusion from the space had to do with a Tinder users feeling exposed to my presence, although it is generally known that Tinder offers a space for people with intentions other than dating. Some, for instance, have fake profiles, as is well known, or look for business opportunities rather than friendship, sex, or romance. But as a researcher, I have to be acutely aware when I may be breaking this veneer of confidentiality. So from someone's perspective, I might have seen things on Tinder I was not entitled to see. And I may have unintentionally pointed out to users the limits of their privacy on the app. So being blocked made me wonder how individuals may have felt coming across my research profile, and whether the ones who did not like my profile had felt preyed upon by me, a declared researcher in the context for sure, but still somewhat hidden behind my profile. And then again, my own research findings did show that the intimacy that people are looking for on Tinder is all but easily definable. People are looking for all kinds of things. Intimacy can be a lot of things. But yeah, there was this question: is coming across someone on Tinder all that different from coming across someone in a more traditional fieldwork setting? Someone who does not want to be part of the research, but is part of the setting, or in a situation where relationships between researcher and researched have to be continuously renegotiated, as is the case in fieldwork. Yeah, but importantly, my being blocked afforded me with the opportunity to reflect upon the imperative of bringing the virtual and the physically experienced into conversation in my quest for knowledge. And here I think of the metaphor of incompleteness as employed by Francis Nyamjo, not as describing an inadequacy, but rather as a disposition reflective of a reality that is always composite and layered. So this applies to both the offline and online, and the power of existence in simultaneous multiplicities. So challenging dualistic assumptions about reality and scholarship, and Nyamjo highlights the virtues of acknowledging interconnections, overlaps, and interdependence between different ways of knowing and experiencing. And this also means embracing conviviality. So it was my intention to explore what makes for a convivial experience pioneered via an online platform, but yet I had limited myself to a rather one-dimensional experience on Tinder at that point of my research. So a key lesson from my good fortune of being blocked at the end of the day, as a result, was focusing on other ways to complement my knowledge. And yeah, so it was an epistemological one. And it helped me appreciate the complexities and nuances of reality and incompleteness as a normal state of being. Spending more time engaging with the participants I had, and instead of worrying about my sample and the kind of information I might be missing out on, also provided me with a moment to take a pause and a step back, or a coming home moment, as the traditional distinction between ethnographic field and home suggests. So this meant increasing my emotional proximity to the topic and my participants' narratives, as opposed to backing away from it. So being blocked turned out to be a crucial moment in my fieldwork and made me take heed on a deeper level about the interdependencies between different facets of the realities of being human and seeking affection. The next slide, please. Yeah, so to conclude, yeah, so in acknowledging digital technologies as part of the social fabric and thus a means and focus of our studies as researchers, the authors De Quieres and Hursand, they will be in the references. The argument ought to be taken seriously that improvisation is part and parcel of ethnographic work. You know, with social science research and research relationships being increasingly codified through formal procedures set by ethics committees that we all are familiar with, improvisation allows for a detailed analysis of topics that would otherwise only be studied superficially or within the confines of the trendy analytical frameworks at the time. So leaning on Van Manen's metaphor of ethnography as jazz, which is used to explain that ethnographers learn their interpretive skills more keen to learning a musical instrument than to solving a puzzle. The authors Humphreys et al. Point out that ethnographers are engaged in a dual quest for self-identity and empathy, which is improvised in ways that resemble the musical conversation between performing jazz musicians. So ethnography is thus a process that is fundamentally creative, exploratory, and interpretive. And throughout my fieldwork, I improvised in the sense that I went back to the traditional snowball recruitment methodology after being banned from Tinder, and by renegotiating my understanding of self as a researcher in the context. And my alertness to treating people as data was heightened the more I reflected upon my initial recruitment approach and my getting caught up in swiping for the optimal sample in my quest for news stories. Sorry. So I think a takeaway is that fieldwork processes are far messier in practice than can be outlined by a strict set of methodological steps and theories. So for me, being banned in the field meant making myself vulnerable and having moments of realizations and of making and unmaking. And it was therefore, it was more of a piecemeal process than a gradual and steady accumulation of data. Yeah, the internal struggles and balance acts that are in more detail described in my thesis, they continuously challenged me throughout the fieldwork process. And so did my grappling with the ethical conundrums of my virtual existence, even after I had been blocked and this existence had technically ceased. Thank you so much. There's the last slide. Or two, yeah, there's the references. Right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Leah. I'm going to stop sharing now. Yes, there it is. And sorry, I think at some point I I went a little too fast. I was in the third slide and you were at the second. Sorry about that. I was kind of getting excited. And thank you so much for this presentation. Thank you for not letting the thunder destabilize you. That was intense at some point. So
yeah, it started very suddenly.
Yeah, exactly. For those who are not in Cape Town, you know, there was some unexpected form as Leah was starting. Okay, thank you. And I'm going to start with two questions. One actually is resonating with the question I see in the chat. I let our participant ask directly more on that. But you know, as soon as I've seen the picture you chose, I was you know, wondering about the kind of personal and presentation of self that you decided on and why. Of course, like the picture you chose are very feels very Tinder friendly. They are the kind of picture you could have in order to have non-research dates with your users. So I was wondering what was the reasoning behind this, and also you know, when you use the phrase going native, and I was wondering how much of an insider were you a Tinder user? And I'm, you know, not asking about not necessarily any confidence, but were you not native before of Tinder? Were you how familiar were you with the codes, with the interactions, with what kind of what picture would be best? I know the application often gives to their users like recommendation on how to choose the best pictures, and you mentioned also that you know, having more pictures is best. I know there's also like a lot of like website that you can find that help users of different dating app having the best chances.
So much, yeah.
And also. Yeah, and also with the presentation of self, I remember like a few years ago, I was reading a study, I think that was for OkCupid, by OkCupid, like analyzing data concerning, you know, race, age of their users, and analyzing their rate of success. And I remember like being a Black woman, I remember being very, very kind of bummed or surprised or not, you know, happy to learn that, you know, Black women were the least desirable population on dating apps. And so like would like do you think it mattered in that way? And do you think that because there was this ambiguity of like, in a way, not being in a position, not of seduction, but trying to use the code, do you think also like the kind of body you could present online was also communicating something? Like, I don't know, I trust somebody that would be trustworthy, somebody that is a student, somebody that is a white woman, you know, all of those things. Like, how, I don't know if you have reflected on that for your thesis, and how now you also reflect back on those decisions of you know, of choosing to present yourself in that way. My second question, and after that I'm going to open the discussion, is also kind of a provocation. Do you think, you know, you discuss a lot the consequences of being banned from Tinder, and that's, you know, like the kind of also traumatic experience. And I've known anthropologists who have been banned from like traditional field sites, and this is something that it's really really hard to recover from, right? But what I hear from what you said, and please correct me, and I'm asking the question for clarification, like you use Tinder as a recruitment tool to discuss and to discuss the experience of Tinder. And I feel that Tinder and much dating app are not really communities. They are like individual, they allow for individual interaction. So you don't could you, okay, I'm going to go straight to the point. Could you do an ethnography of Tinder, like totally offline? Why do you need to be online to do an ethnography of Tinder? Like most, I guess like most of the population use at some point Tinder. You can just like snowball, like have a snowball recruitment, just using people you know, and then, you know, have a perfectly acceptable sample, like constantly expanding, and never have to, you know, to set foot on the app. What is it? What did it add to your result? And I'm sure it did, because I know how you express like the trauma of losing this access. So those are my first question, and I might have some later, but I just want to start with that and let others ask their questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right. So the first question, about the pictures. I think so that was a few years back now. Let me think, 3-4 years, I don't know. So I think I would probably select the pictures differently now. And I did receive comments on that presenting at an anthropology conference, something similar. And I think it was also part of that. When I said going native, it was more meant sort of almost like the opposite of what is usually meant by going native. So usually you become closer to the people you study and you start understanding better. But in this sense, I became native as a Tinder in the sense that I increased my distance, and I went into this swiping mode and kind of just trying to find this great sample, and which it's not possible to have a complete or perfect sample, obviously, but in this moment I felt really almost stuck in this, and there is something quite addictive to that process of swiping. So that is how the going native phrase is meant in that context. So I did try out Tinder before, not very long before I started doing field work, but I think I deleted it half a year or more before I started using it as a recruitment tool. And I used it for a little bit to figure out how it works, and also because I was curious and I was interested. And my whole interest in Tinder started because I think from 2016, I started hearing Tinder stories all the time. And I thought, what is this thing? I came quite late to that, gain more understanding what Tinder even is. And initially, it was also considered to be more of a hookup app, while this changed. So I did speak that Tinder language a little bit when I started doing the research, and that did help sort of understanding a little bit of how people present themselves. And I did maximize on, or like take advantage of my connection with UCT in the profile picture, also because I was worried that my authenticity would be questioned, or my motives would be questioned, which they were, I'm sure, which they always are doing ethnographic field work. In any field, people will come and say, but why are you doing this? And why are you intruding? And this has always been a big fear of mine, going into the field and feeling, becoming aware that I'm really intruding. And so yes, I think I might, I would probably choose different pictures now. Then it was sort of, a lot of my research process was intuitively guided. And at the time, it seemed like this just represents me. I think now I'm looking at it from a bit of a different angle. And as I said, I also didn't have a whole lot of pictures because I'm not a selfie taker. So most of the pictures I have are have family members in them. And so yeah, that's how that came about. But it's definitely interesting still to reflect upon these things later. And I think one of the points I'm trying to make is that it's I think it's really important to have honest conversations about this without feeling too because I do believe that autoethnography is a big part of any research process. And I tried in my thesis to put that out there myself as a researcher in that context. And yeah, that does not always resonate well, or that a lot of questions are raised that should probably more often be raised, but I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah, and then your second question was about being banned. And yeah, I agree with you in terms of the community aspect. Nobody I interviewed identified as a Tinderer, even though I refer to people using Tinder as Tinderers. But there's no sense of community there. It's a very individualistic journey, if you will. And people were harboring very ambiguous feelings about Tinder in general, not thinking that it's a place where they would really make authentic or real connections, or that they were somehow lesser. But that is also an aspect that I was trying to grapple with in the dissertation itself, that idea that there's somehow something to this application that makes intimacy a certain way, which it doesn't necessarily have to be, right? And yeah, so I could have, to go back to your question, recruited offline. That would not have been a problem. But I did not want to. I think mostly, to be honest, I was intrigued about using an app to do research, and what this experience as an autoethnographic, the autoethnographic aspect of it also, to experience what it feels like to be a researcher in that space. And I had been a Tinder user in that space before, but that's not quite the same. And I was looking at it through different eyes. But yeah, there wasn't a requirement and to use the app, but I do think I definitely learned a lot from it. And a lot of the people I'm not sure I would have met. And that is something also that people are always emphasize about Tinder, that they appreciate this ability to extend the self beyond the familiar and what's comfortable, even though people tend to stick with what's familiar and comfortable. But having that opportunity, and I was just very intrigued by that, having the opportunity to extend myself as a researcher and to create these connections, even though that, yeah, that gave me a lot to chew on while, yeah, processing these experiences.
Thank you so much, Leah, for those answers, and thank you also. I think I think those choices are fascinating, and we are lucky also that you accept to present them and discuss them, and sharing those pictures, and it's really an interesting occasion to discuss ethnography and methods. We have a question in the chat, and I'm also asking if participants want to ask other questions. You can raise your hands, and for the two participants that have asked questions in the chat, would you want me to read those questions, or to let you ask them? There might be a follow-up for the first one that I kind of also absorbed it because it was also the first question I wanted to ask. So Andrew, would you like to ask this question or like modify it or add to it?
No, not really. I think you're on. I think your pickup on it, your way you picked up on it is probably sufficient. Simply, do you think your gender profile was different? That if your gender profile was different, you might have had a different response from the potential participants, particularly given that the binary nature of the fact that it's using gender binary rather than a multiplicity of gender. But that's a whole, that second part is a whole different discussion.
Yeah, I'm sure. I can imagine it having looked different. As I mean, it's impossible to know, but it's quite likely, and yeah, that applies to my positionality offline also to some extent. But there is something particular about being on a platform that is dedicated to intimate encounters, and that is something that was always on my mind, and I was being trying to be cautious in how I was communicating. And but I do think at the end of the day, the people that ended up taking part in the research had the same motivations, or for the most part at least, for what I've heard in other ethnographic researches I conducted, and mostly wanting to be able to talk, and especially male participants feeling like they can't really share these experiences and their insecurities. But a lot of people were sort of trying to seek my advice, and I had to always emphasize that I'm not by no means a Tinder expert, or I cannot tell them how to find the perfect intimate relationship. But there were a lot of questions in terms of what I think, and I often found myself almost put in the position of being a counselor or like not a counselor, someone giving advice. Like you said, Dom, there's so much out there on YouTube and everywhere where people are giving advice how to, present yourself and so on, how to behave. So I often found myself in that position where people were asking a lot of advice. So yeah, I think overall the motivations were not dissimilar to doing research in other contexts. But I'm sure, my being female and a certain age and being affiliated with UCT and all of these things, they contributed and to me getting those connections, definitely.
And sort of naughty follow-up. Everybody can see my picture on the screen at the moment. If that were the picture that had been there, how would they have responded? You don't have to answer that. It's just a joke.
Fair point. But yes,
no, that's an excellent point. Like gender, age, ethnicity, or we're allowing you to be seen as non-threatening, and Thank you so much. We have a few questions and little time, but we have a few questions in the chat. So we have Angelique, we have Mimi, we have Babacar. They all have very long questions. And do you really want me to read that with my French accent, or would you want to go ahead and let us hear your voice, Angelique? But if you can't, I'm fine. I'll read them. Angelique, what do you prefer?
I don't mind reading them out. Hi, Leah. Thanks so much for this talk. It is really interesting. and it's really just really useful to hear about how you went about your process as I start thinking about doing field work. I'm interested to know, when you lost access to your online data, did your notes supplement that part, or did you completely, was there data that was completely lost, like 100% lost, and you had no backups, no notes on it and anything? And then, I mean, that also touches on, I think, the point that Dom made about how, I mean, a lot of conversations might not have necessarily happened on Tinder, the platform itself, because you did say, you know, we can go for the coffee and everything. So I guess I'm just trying to figure out how much data you actually lost. My second question was around how you navigated conversations around basically sex, love, and dating. I mean, it's a really intimate topic. When people go on these platforms, I suppose I mean, I'm just thinking of some friends of mine, they assume that there's some sense of privacy because they are only looking for these people to engage with in some form of relationship, whereas now having to broker the relationship in another way as a researcher, how did you navigate that space? Was it difficult for people to speak about it? Yeah, that's what I want to know. And then the last question was, well, I'm really interested to hear just about the experiences of your participants themselves, because you speak a lot about your process and that's really helpful. But I guess I'm also interested just to hear what your findings were from your participants, how they experienced Tinder and what you learned from the research overall.
Yes. Okay. Should I go ahead?
Yes, please. I just want to indicate that, okay, we just have a few more minutes. We will go a little over time to allow you to to answer to the last question we have. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so in terms of the data loss, I suppose, yeah, since most of my ethnographic field work was really taking place offline, I was not so much interested for that research, although it's also interesting, but I wasn't so much focused on the online experience, but as an isolated experience, but the overall experiences of participants. So it made sense for me to focus on the offline, and I was also a bit worried about getting stuck online and conversations becoming complicated. And I felt it was fair to meet in person and to, yeah, and also easier to navigate. So it wasn't a lot of data. I mean, I did take a lot of field notes, but as I said in the presentation, I did take more field notes afterwards, and was a bit paranoid about yeah, losing anything. And yeah, so it didn't take away any of my data, I would say, but in the moment it was really, as some said, it was traumatic, I guess. Yeah, it was, because it's something one fears in the field, right? Being just sort of excluded and someone telling you, no, you can't do this, and you planned this for a long time, and this is, you know, what you set out to do. And then, I mean, a lot of fantastic research has happened by researchers who have been sort of kicked out of the field, and they've gone different avenues, and there's always some kind of way. But yeah, I was quite worried when I was confronted with this, and also not having an explanation. I really was just wanting an explanation. Yeah, and in terms of navigating conversations about sex and relationships and all of that, participants were surprisingly forthcoming with a lot of things, and which I didn't always expect. And that would usually happen over time, though, not necessarily in the first meeting or so. As I said, I was also using a life history approach. So we would talk about a lot of things, and I would sort of seek to understand where the person is coming from and how they interpret their experiences. why, against what backdrop. So the conversation about the more sensitive topics, if you will, they happen pretty organically, I'd say. Yeah, I mean, I never felt I had to push for them, and I wouldn't have because it's not necessarily the focus. But yeah, so that was. I'm often doing ethnographic research. I'm surprised how forthcoming people can be. While I always think, as I said earlier, I'm always worried or wondering why would people want to share their intimate everyday routines, which I probably wouldn't necessarily be so forthcoming. Maybe I would, I'm not sure. Probably also always depends on who asks, and how. Yeah, and the experiences overall. Yeah, that could be a whole different seminar. There was a lot of very interesting things, and I think the one of the most interesting things is that there's not one thing that is Tindering or using Tinder, and there's not one kind of intimacy people are looking for. And yeah, as I said earlier, people would not think of the app as a good tool to establish intimacy, real kind of intimacy. There would always be considered something lesser when happening through Tinder. But at the same time, there was an appreciation of that idea of being able to extend the self and having different kinds of experiences. And that is very much in line with Tinder's marketing strategies, where there's often very young women shown sort of climbing fences and taking agency. And so, yeah, there was very, very ambiguous feelings. But people were using the app very persistently and kept deleting the app, but also re-downloading it and using a different kind of approach each time for different kinds of intimacy. So always depending on what their life situation was, and would sort of tweak the way they were using it. And sometimes have experiences that were unexpected. So yeah, but I'm sure we can talk about this some other time also in more detail.
Thank you, Leah. And I don't want to take time from the questions, but I feel like there's a I don't know if you've done that in your thesis, in your dissertation, but thinking about what is the magic of encountering the informant, the interviewee, the super knowledgeable person that this kind of mythic figure of the, and there's something like about the magic of this encounter that maybe has to do also with the magic of falling in love with somebody in the street or somewhere.
Yes.
And so that I think that's a beautiful topic to explore. I don't know if you've done it.
It is, and that was also, just very briefly, an aspect of the thesis, because Tinder was often sometimes used in a very rationalized way, or it was described like that. Mm-hmm. One of my participants, I don't remember which name I gave him in the thesis, but he, at our first meeting, would say he was using Tinder to have love without the fall. He was referencing a philosopher, and he was explaining why that would be better, and things not getting too messy, and so on and so forth. But in the same conversation later on, he told me that he downloaded Happen, which is a dating app that sort of creates this magical encounter. So it's also GPS based, but people who cross paths around the same time or regularly, you can see, you can match with them. I haven't tried it out, but yeah, so there was this, he was rationalizing it and wanted love without the fall, but at the same time, he wanted the magic, obviously. Yeah, that was quite interesting also.
Thank you, Leah. Although we are like out of time, I'm going to ask Mimi and Babacar to ask their questions separately because they are very different. So Mimi, if you could ask your question briefly, and then we'll take Babacar's question.
Thank you, Dominic. Hi, Leah. Thank you for your wonderful topic on entering research on the internet. My question and comment are directed. My question and comment, they're both directed to the terms and conditions of dating apps, which I think, although there's so much to glean from the intricacies and intimacies that dating apps offer. I think the people that own these apps have very, very strict rules that are quite impermeable for people that want to ask questions and take advantage of their products, the products who are the people that are there. Ultimately, those who are using this free platform, if you're not paying for the paid version, if you're using the free version, you are ultimately the product. So there's an aspect of protecting the product. Perhaps, of course, I'm just as an assumption, there's an aspect of the product being the data itself. The people are the data, and if you are taking advantage of the data, then you are kind of, you're crossing the boundaries to what Tinder is ultimately trying to do. They want the product ultimately to themselves and not to any other third party. So I think that might be the reason why you might have been kicked out. But my question is like, did you think about reaching out to those that are owning this platform to do the research? And I think it might have been difficult if you tried, because given how protective they are of their products and the data that these products offer them commercially. Did you think about speaking to them beforehand to ask for permission?
Yes. Can I go ahead, Dom, or should we?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Please.
I did. I got in touch with Tinder before I started when I was planning my fieldwork, but they never got back to me, and I was at that point. It was not necessarily to seek permission, because there doesn't seem to be anything against. In the rules and regulations, it doesn't say explicitly that you're not allowed to do research, but yeah, you're right. I mean, that wouldn't be in their interest now, and clearly they had no interest in replying to my email asking about or mentioning that I'm interested in doing a study, and I was sort of trying to figure out if they might be wanting to support me at that point, or with some additional information, or but yeah, they're very difficult to get hold of. I found out at that point, but it was confirmed to me when I was banned, and I was limited to email communication and had to wait, and then the same email came twice, and every time I asked the question again, they would just send me standard emails. So yeah, clearly there's no interest, and that there wasn't any interest in that case, and I suspect that that may have had something to do with me being banned. I would have really liked that confirmation, but surely they wouldn't want to give that to me then either, I would imagine.
Thank you, Leah. We are going to take a very brief question from Babacar. If you can just like shorten your question so it fits like, I don't know, 30 seconds slot, and then we have a very short answer from Leah.
Thank you, Dom. I think even Leah answered my question when he was replying back to Angelique's. What I liked in your presentation is that the way the practice on the field is helping you reshape your theoretical. So how practice reshape, theory. But it seems to me that you were not using the app. You were using the app only to recruit people and then go offline and talk or discuss with them. And it seems to me like it was a kind of a disembodied online ethnography. So, and now I understand now. You don't need to respond, but I understand now. You're just only using the app to go offline and talk to people. And what don't you think that, what if you were using the app for what it is set for? Don't you think that might help you really understand more about how people use the app? So I'm just trying to understand if yourself you're using the app for what it's set for, that might help you really maybe reframe your question or maybe have more access to more information. I don't know.
Do you mean as a covert researcher or as a Tinder user, just a normal Tinder user?
Tinder user, because sometimes, for example, I know it is specific, the topic is specific because it's about sex, love, intimacy, and so what if you were a Tinder user, and then if yes, that might maybe help you, go deeper into the relationship and into the information you're seeking for.
Yeah. So I did try out the app before, so that was a year or so, or maybe 2 years before. No, probably less. Anyway, but a while before I started actually doing the field work, and I did. So that sort of informed my auto-ethnographic experience a bit.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to understand. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Dom.
Thank you, Leah. I think we have more questions for you, but I want to be mindful of time. So I think we can offer another space especially for you, my colleagues, to ask questions to Leah. I think we have more comments, and we are so interested in this topic. Sure. So let me wrap the session. And first, thank you so much for sharing your work with us. I know that you're preparing a paper on methodology and this experience of research, and we are looking forward to reading it and further engaging with those ideas. I'm going also to announce our next seminar that's going to be on November 24th. We are alternating with the African epistemology seminar, and sometimes it's not, it's not every other week, but sometimes every other month. So that's what's happening. And actually, I'm going to be the guest on the 24th of November. So I think I will be talking about truth-telling and secret-keeping, the ethics of and politics of renaming. And this time, I'm not going to host and be a guest at the same time. So I think my colleague Angelique Thomas will be hosting that seminar. Thank you so much, everybody. And I think it's time to say goodbye.
Right. Thank you so much for having me. That was really lovely.